As we take a look at going back and maybe giving us a quick background on some of the objectives and some of the things going on at the USDA research.
Yeah, our research is really about this balance. You've got, as Brian pointed out, we've got agriculture production, and you've got these losses on the other side, whether it's volatilization, nitrous oxide, or leaching going down through the profile. And if you look at this, our objective in a broad sense is really to look and say, how do stabilizers or additives that we put into fertilizers influence the gaseous emissions? How might they influence the leaching down through the profile? And at the same time, how do they influence the crop productivity? And you might think about that as a pathway to yield. And if you look at some data that we have from Colorado, where one of our studies has been done for a number of years, because what's unique about the Colorado study compared to the Iowa study is this is irrigated land. And we have urea, UAN, we have ESN, AGROTAIN technologies, and you look at the nitrous oxide emissions. In all of those, if you look at straight urea on that left-hand side, there's a large emission going out. And if you think about any nitrogen loss from the system, whether it's leaching down through the profile or moving into the air, that's not nitrogen that's available to the plant.
Right. But it's something that the farmer is paid for.
The farmer has paid for that, and when they begin to think about their losses from that standpoint, then they really look at technologies or practices that can reduce those losses. And so one of the objectives of our research is really to understand the mechanisms that are behind this. What causes these variations in nitrous oxide emissions throughout the season? As Brian pointed out, you have to have really, it's much more of a flooded soil. We tend to think when we say flooded soils that it's really, you know, you got to have standing water on the top.
Not the case, is that right?
Not the case. In fact, we see little burps of nitrous oxide come out after small rainfall events. And what we think is going on within the soil is that you have this denitrification because the soil has been wet, and then when we get a rainfall event, it just makes that channel between the soil and the atmosphere almost like a freeway for these gases to move, so then they move very quickly.
You mentioned in the video, I think, that one of the effects of nitrogen stabilization was keeping the chlorophyll, the green in the leaves, longer. You were in August, it was very green, people that could see that, and I found that very interesting earlier today when you talked about that with me. Maybe explain to our viewers a little bit more about that, if you would.
Yeah, it's really a very simple process, but we won't think about it very much. And that's the fact that the longer we can keep a plant green during the grain filling period, the higher the yield. And you think about this because our factory in producing grain is the ear or the leaves, and then it's placing all that sugar that it makes converted into starch that we finally put into grain. So the longer we can keep that factory active in terms of the leaf color out there, the higher the yield at the end. In fact, we have a very simple relationship that shows that the faster that plant senesces, the lower the yield.
Yeah.
And so anything that we can do in this production system to maintain that green leaf color is going to be a positive benefit for yield.
Yeah, I would think that the human nature of the farmer is that when you get to August, or around Labor Day, you want that plant to start drying down, looking brown, and cut for silage or get ready to harvest. But if they can keep that a little greener another week or 10 days, it makes a big difference, it sounds like.
It does make a big difference. You look at years in which we've had a long grain filling period, tend to be the years in which we produce our highest yields.
Seems like this is all positive for the farmer. They have the less greenhouse emissions. They have the potential for a higher productivity, a good chance of improving their yields. It's a win-win.
It is a win-win, and that's what's kind of interesting about it, because as Brian said, you know, we've been working with nitrogen for 100 years and doing really kind of the same thing over and over again. And yet when we look at this saying, how do we achieve some new goals? And these new goals for the producers are to improve their productivity with less amount of nitrogen, also being asked to reduce, you know, anything that leaches through the profile or reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So they're asked to balance now three things And so how do we begin to think about new ways of nitrogen management to achieve that?
Yeah, you see a lot more articles, it seems, and we have programs that deal with the subject matter as well. It's out there, and the growing atmosphere of being aware of it, I think, is the first thing. But what would you say growers need to take away from the kind of research you're doing and the kind of information we're providing here this evening?
Well, I think one of the major messages to take away from what we've been looking at is that there are ways in which we can manage nitrogen so that it is more profitable from an agronomic perspective. It's more less harmful to the environment
Sure.
in terms of reducing the emissions going out, that it stabilizes that nitrogen early in the spring so we see less of it available in the nitrate form to leach through the profile. Because farmers were often concerned about ourselves. You mentioned 2008 in Iowa where we were really wet, is that we see a lot of leaching down below the root zone. Anything that we can do to minimize those processes that are going on in the soil are going to be a positive benefit.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know we get a lot of questions whenever AGROTAIN is on our program, and I'm sure that'll be the case tonight, especially with international guest here all the way from Switzerland, growing up in Iowa. But if you would like to join us with questions you might have for your operation, how it might apply, perhaps a soil type where you are located in the part of the country, please join us here live on the telephones, 866-547-9696. That is 866-547-9696, and begin calling that number now. We'll put all the telephone calls together and put these two gentlemen to work here a little bit as we continue on through the program. We, Jerry Hatfield, Dr. Jerry Hatfield with us from USDA Agricultural Research Service from Iowa, and we talk a little bit more about reducing these greenhouse gases, and this is research that you, and along with, I'm sure you're right next door to Iowa State University there, they've been hand in hand, and the land-grant universities play a big part in doing this, helping out as well, do they not?
They do, and you think about the partnership that exists, in fact, across the Iowa, or the Agricultural Research Service, we have a 35 location network that has a research program on greenhouse gas emissions. And I mentioned the 5 different locations that we're doing some of this work as part of that network. But then you also have got a whole series of universities as well looking at greenhouse gas reduction. So we're trying to bring both of those systems together because everybody's asking a question today on what are the greenhouse gas emissions, what can I do to reduce those, what is going to happen in this system, you know, how's all this fit together, and how do I change my farming system to reduce this as we go into the future.
Especially before it might be forced on me to do something about it here. Dr. Jerry Hatfield and Dr. Brian Wade, our guests on the program, AGROTAIN, our guests here at RFD-TV Live. Again, the telephone number for you to join us, 866-547-9696. We'll begin taking telephone calls and continue our discussion with AGROTAIN in just a moment.